Today, we are wrestling with something. Well, something that feels like an invisible enemy, something that dictates nearly every single aspect of modern life. We're talking about time itself.
It really does feel like an enemy sometimes, doesn't it?
It does. And if you, like me, frequently feel that gnawing anxiety, that chronic background sense that you are perpetually running late or that you're not efficient enough or just that time is slipping through your fingers, then this deep dive is definitely for you.
Hmm.
We are focusing today on the extraordinary work of the artist and writer Jenny Odell, specifically her book, Saving Time, Discovering a Life Beyond the Clock.
And for anyone who knows her previous bestseller, How to Do Nothing, you'll know that Odell doesn't really deal in quick fixes.
No, not at all. This is not a productivity guide. It's not some new self-help manual with 5 easy steps. It's much, much deeper.
It is.
Our mission today is to follow her argument, her really compelling argument, that our anxiety about time, it's not a personal failure. It's a systemic problem, one that's rooted in, well, in centuries of industrialization and colonial history.
Right.
So the goal is to leave this conversation with the intellectual tools to perceive time in a way that is richer, more humane, and frankly, just more real.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's an essential journey. Odell actually calls this book a panoramic assault on nihilism, which I just think that captures the scale of the critique so perfectly.
Wow. An assault on nihilism.
Yeah, she is seeking to recover an appetite for the future. For those of us who feel squeezed between the daily scarcity of time, the relentless deadlines, the packed schedules, and then this huge existential dread of things like, say, climate change.
That's a huge gap to bridge.
It is. So she's not just talking about better scheduling, she's really talking about changing the fundamental vocabulary we use to describe our own reality. And, this book was actually born out of a kind of frustration.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, after How to Do Nothing was published, the consistent feedback she received from readers was, I love this idea of resisting the attention economy. It sounds amazing, but I simply do not have the time.
Of course. That's the perfect pivot point, isn't it?
Exactly.
She realized the biggest obstacle to resisting the attention economy wasn't fragmented attention itself, but this inability to even conceptualize, let alone secure the temporal bandwidth you need for things like community or contemplation or just rest.
It forced her inquiry so much deeper. She had to go from the symptom, which is our divided attention, to the root cause, the political and historical structure of time itself.
Because if we can't even secure or imagine a moment of free time, then any talk of structural change or resistance, it just stays purely theoretical, doesn't it?
It's just a nice idea. We have to start by diagnosing the mechanism that stole our time in the first place.
Okay, so let's start with that pain, because it's so immediate and so universal. Odell is just brilliant at this because she validates both scales of temporal anxiety. There is that everyday granular sense, rushing after a bus, worrying you've wasted someone else's hour in a meeting. We all know that feeling.
Oh, absolutely. The micro-anxiety.
And then there's the other end of the spectrum, the big existential feeling, the doomsday clock, the fear that the planet is running out of time, or even just the feeling that our own lives are running out before we've had a chance to really live them.
She even shares that her recurring anxiety dream is of running out of time or constantly being late.
I think a lot of us have that dream. So why? Why does modern life feel like we are living in a constant fight or flight mode when it comes to time?
That feeling is the exact starting point for her entire critique. We accept this feeling and the logic underneath it, that time is an enemy we have to constantly battle and optimize. We accept it as natural. But Odell's whole point is that it is anything but natural.
It's a construct.
It's a complete construct. Her core critique is, it's actually pretty straightforward. The notion that time is money is a strange, historically specific idea deeply tied to capitalism and the industrial need for efficiency. It is not some universal law of nature or physics.
It feels the most familiar to us, but she says it's actually the most strange.
That's it. Philosophically, it's bizarre.
So what made that change possible? It seems like this transition from time being this, organic, localized concept to a standardized, universal commodity must have had a specific historical point of rupture.
It absolutely did. The crucial separation point, the big invention, was the fungible hour.
Fungible. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Fungible simply means interchangeable. So before this era, an hour in summer was qualitatively different from an hour in winter. An hour spent carving wood was a different kind of time than an hour spent waiting for the tide to come in. They weren't the same thing.
We had a texture, a context.
Precisely. The fungible hour is an hour that is indistinguishable from the one before it or the one after it, regardless of the season or the type of labor or even the time of day. This standardization was what transformed time into a commodity, something to be hoarded, sold, and optimized.
So how did that standardization happen? Was it purely a technological thing, or was commerce the main driver?
It was a perfect storm, really, a confluence of the two. On the technological side, you had the invention of the escapement.
The what?
The escapement. It's the mechanism inside a clock that keeps mechanical time going uniformly, the part that makes the tick-tock sound. It allowed clocks to run consistently without needing constant manual intervention, replacing older, more variable methods like sundials or, having someone ring a bell every hour.
Okay, so the tech was there.
But technology is just a tool, right?
Yeah.
It's inert without an economic application. And the commercial need was absolutely crucial. As towns became commercial centers and wage labor became the norm, employers needed a way to count and measure the labor hours they were buying from people.
Right, they couldn't pay based on the quality of the sunlight or the rhythm of the season.
Exactly. They needed fixed, measurable units of output and input. The fungible hour was the perfect unit for that.
That economic incentive really is the key, isn't it? And Odell has this incredibly powerful visual metaphor for that process, which I just loved. She links the standardization of time to the standardization of space.
Oh, the Oakland port.
Yes. She sets her whole exploration of the time is money concept at the Port of Oakland, looking at standardized shipping containers.
The shipping container is just a fantastic metaphor. I mean, think about it. A standardized shipping container is a uniform, interchangeable box designed for one purpose, to make commerce go faster across the world.
It strips away the uniqueness of the cargo, the story of the journey.
Everything. And Odell is saying that the fungible hour is essentially a shipping container for time. It strips away the qualitative difference of the moment, the environment, or the labor, making every hour interchangeable and ready for mass commercial movement.
That is such a powerful image. And this abstraction, it didn't just stop there. It only continued to accelerate.
Oh, absolutely. The 20th century gave us Taylorism, or scientific management, which was pioneered by a man named Frederick Winslow Taylor.
Right, the efficiency guy.
The original efficiency guy. His system was designed to quantify and systematize every single physical element of factory labor to make it faster and more predictable. It was the next logical step in turning human life into a series of quantifiable data points.
Can you give us a concrete example of what Taylorism actually looked like in practice? Because when I hear stopwatch, I just think of a supervisor checking how long someone's break is, not something this insidious.
It went so much further than break times. Taylorism involved using a stopwatch to break down every single action. Lifting a shovel, placing a bolt, turning a wrench into minute timed components. The ultimate goal was to eliminate all wasteful or unnecessary movement.
Dehumanizing.
Completely. Odell highlights this one specific graphic from a 1916 issue of Factory magazine. It was titled, "The Stopwatch as Inventor."
As inventor, not as a measuring device.
As inventor,
Yeah.
the stopwatch wasn't just measuring the work that was already happening. It was being used to invent a new, totally dehumanized sequence of standardized movements for the worker to follow. The man literally became an extension of the time machine he was operating.
That changes the whole frame. The stopwatch isn't a neutral tool of measurement. It's a tool of invention, inventing a new, optimized, but less human.
And that industrial logic, it didn't stay confined to the factory floor. Odell notes there were immediate attempts to apply these same principles to clerical and office management.
I was just about to ask about that.
Yeah. She mentions this obscure device called the time-hard Sperry Meta. It was an early, sort of clunky mechanical device designed to log and time discrete clerical tasks, like typing or filing, forcing that same standardization and measurable output into white-collar environments, too.
Wow. We tend to think of efficiency, anxiety, and this kind of micromanagement as a modern digital thing, with all the tracking software we have now. But it's clear the historical impulse to extract more labor in less time is centuries deep.
Absolutely. And then, inevitably, comes the ultimate internalization of that logic. By 1925, you start seeing books like Increasing Personal Efficiency, which took Taylor's industrial principles and applied them directly to the individual's personal life, to their thoughts, to their downtime,
So it moves from the factory to the home.
to your own mind. In this view, you, the modern individual, become, and this is her phrase, both factory owner and factory.
Right.
You are now responsible for logging your own progress, optimizing your own downtime, and reinforcing this toxic systemic idea that everyone has 24 truly fungible hours, and if you fail, it's because you were inefficient.
And this is where Odell links it directly to these modern figures she calls productivity bros,
Mhm.
the content creators who sell the idea that personal policing, rigid schedules, and time management hacks are these cure-all solutions.
Precisely. That entire genre reinforces the false narrative that those who fail to succeed under the clock are just behind because of some personal flaw or poor scheduling, rather than acknowledging the structural constraints, like chronic illness or lack of childcare or systemic poverty, which inherently limit one's access to that fungible time.
It puts all the onus on the individual and none on the system.
Exactly.
So if the standardization of time was driven by this need for economic extraction, how was this abstract concept enforced on a political and a global scale? It couldn't have just been a voluntary agreement, was it?
Not at all. Standardized time is deeply, deeply rooted in colonial worldviews. It accelerated with the rise of global colonial powers.
Mm.
The British Navy, for example, invented and mastered the marine chronometer in the 18th century, which was a huge leap forward. It allowed for precise global measurement of longitude for the first time,
Which is essential for controlling the seas.
for controlling the world. And this system was then institutionalized when Greenwich, England, became the global reference point for time. Master clocks in Greenwich began sending out Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT, to slave clocks all across the empire via electrical pulses.
The language itself, master and slave clocks, I mean, that just says everything, doesn't it? It highlights the inherent hierarchy and control embedded right there in the temporal system.
It's not subtle, and the global structure of time zones follow that same logic. I find it fascinating that the main impetus came from the infrastructure of commerce and control. A man named Sanford Fleming developed the cosmic day, the 24 standardized time zones we use now back in 1886, specifically for the Canadian railway network.
So it was about trains.
It was about trains. The railway was the ultimate tool for imposing uniformity on these vast, diverse geographies. Trains needed to run predictably and safely. You couldn't have one town running on solar noon and the next town running 15 minutes later. It would be chaos. Commerce demanded alignment.
And that necessity of synchronized travel imposed uniformity on a global scale. It's wild.
It is. But the truly politically revealing detail, which Odell excavates from labor history, is how this new clock time was maintained against resistance.
Yeah.
Because people did resist.
Of course. When workers began organizing to demand better conditions and control over their own labor time, the fight for the 8-hour day, for instance, what was the response?
The response was physical and institutional. Commerce leaders responded by urging cities to build armories in urban industrial areas, these dour, substantial buildings that you still see in some old cities.
Right.
The historical records show that the primary purpose of these buildings was not for defense against foreign threats, but, and this is a quote, to allow the rapid deployment of the militia to keep working men in check.
That is profound and genuinely alarming. The transition to clock time wasn't just some beneficial efficiency upgrade for society. It was an act of enforced temporal enclosure.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
You had local, communal, and seasonal rhythms being physically erased by the state, all in the service of this new capitalist temporality.
So the maintenance of the standardized clock required, and it still requires, the deployment of state force against those who resist its rhythm or who just can't adhere to its standards.
Yes. This shows that time, as we experience it every day, is fundamentally a political construct.
Okay, so we've thoroughly diagnosed the pain. We understand the tyranny of what Odell calls chronos, that relentless, linear, quantitative clock time built for maximizing profit. And if we accept its dominance, it just leaves us feeling fatalistic, with the future looking like this depressing foregone conclusion.
Right, like you're just on a conveyor belt to the end.
Exactly. But is Odell just leaving us with this nihilistic diagnosis, or does she offer a functioning vocabulary for escape? How do we step off that conveyor belt and recover a sense of agency?
This is where we get to make the big shift, the shift in our entire linguistic and philosophical framework. She resurrects these ancient Greek concepts of time. We've talked about chronos. That's the quantitative, measurable, everyday calendar time, the time that just keeps marching forward. That's where the determinism lives.
The tic-tac.
The tick-tock. The alternative is kairos.
Kairos.
Kairos is qualitative, opportune time. It's the interruption. It's the moment of critical change, the dynamic event. It's not about duration, it's about fitness for action. It's the earthquake, as she calls it, the moment when everything breaks open and creation becomes possible.
Kairos sounds like a moment of radical freedom, but how do you live a life based on interruptions? I mean, if Chronos is necessary for the trains to run on time, how do you incorporate Kairos into a world that is so obsessed with schedules?
Well, Odell emphasizes that this conceptual shift isn't just academic. It's not just a nice idea to think about. It directly affects what seems possible in every moment of your life.
Okay.
When you are trapped in Kroos, you feel fundamentally undignified, limited only to consumer choices. You're asked, which green product will you buy? Which productivity hack will you download?
It's the drop-down menu approach to life. You can only pick from the pre-approved options.
Exactly. But Kairos is the reminder that you have choices that are not on the drop-down menu, choices that require collective ingenuity. As Odell puts it, choices that require you to put your heads together with some other folks and sort of make a trail where there wasn't one before. It opens up that field of possibility.
So the past is not destiny. If we adopt this Kairos lens, how does that change our perception of history? It can't be just a straight line anymore.
It makes history feel alive and contingent. She spent time in archives and said she had this powerful realization that everything that ever happened was not supposed to happen. Every historical change, every revolution, every invention was just people seizing a moment, a kairos, and making a choice that wasn't inevitable.
That's a really freeing thought.
It is. She cites the feeling of seeing a colorized historical photo from, say, the 1930s or 1940s. You look at those people, you realize they weren't these faded historical figures. They were just individuals, just like us, responding to their moment with agency. That realization that history is not a rigid line, but a series of dynamic choices, makes the future look incredibly vibrant and open.
That gives me a deep sense of hope. So if Kairos is the gateway to hope, how do we actually access it in our daily lives? Odell suggests it often involves ego-effacing things, experiences that sort of soften the boundary around the individual.
Yes, these are experiences that don't slot neatly into a utilitarian, productive framework. They often involve intense observation or immersion in something non-human or collective, which has the effect of reminding us that we are just small parts of a much larger, much older system.
The warbler anecdote she tells is a perfect illustration of this kind of transcendence. She was teaching at Stanford, walking late to class, just full of that Chronos anxiety about being unprepared and running behind.
We've all been there.
Totally. And then, out of nowhere, she saw an unexpected warbler.
And she describes just freezing, just stopping, forgetting for a moment her immediate human identity as professor and her anxiety-driven schedule. That specific sudden sight connected her not to the clock on her wrist, but to a migratory clock, to this vast geography that transcends her personal fleeting moment of stress.
The self-imposed boundary just dissolved.
It dissolved,
Yeah.
reminding her, as she says, I am an animal, an earthly being. That is Kairos. It's that urgent moment of connection that shatters the tyranny of the schedule.
And she finds a similar power in art, which she sees as a tool for reframing reality.
Absolutely. Art has the power to pierce what she calls the crust that everyone grows to just get through the day. She recounts attending a John Cage performance in San Francisco, a very experimental music piece. And when she walked out, she realized she was hearing the city anew.
How so?
It was like she had a hearing aid. The normal din of the city, the traffic, the sirens, which she had learned to filter out and ignore, suddenly became dynamic and complex and full of distinct, interesting sounds.
So it's about paying a different kind of attention.
It suggests that accessing Kairos isn't about finding a moment of perfect silence. It's about recalibrating your sensory input so you can hear the animate world speaking to you again, which operates on a fundamentally different rhythm than the industrial clock.
That shift from the personal interruption of Kairos now brings us to a bigger scale, the environmental and ecological scale. If the industrial clock's whole purpose was to impose uniformity, Adela suggests the antidote is recognizing and valuing what she calls chronodiversity.
Chronodiversity, I love that term. It's the recognition and stewardship of manifold, nonlinear, ecological, and communal temporal rhythms. It's an argument for embracing the fact that complexity reigns supreme outside of the clock's narrow domain. It's really about decentralizing time.
And where does she start with that critique?
It starts with something as simple as the 4 seasons, the highly standardized and often culturally imported model of 4 equal seasons. Odell notes that growing up in the Bay Area, she internalized that concept despite the fact that the local environment doesn't map well at all to that that European framework.
Oh, I know exactly what she means. I rely on a weather app telling me it's officially spring, but the plants outside my window are behaving like it's still late winter. You realize how completely unintuitive the calendar is compared to the lived, local reality of water, temperature, and sunlight.
Exactly. Time isn't standardized out there. It's determined by bioregional factors. She offers these two beautiful examples of local clocks in California that she pays attention to.
What are they?
First, the Douglas iris. She observed it flowering what she thought was early, according to her human calendar, and it made her stop. She had this realization that the iris does not have a calendar.
Right. It's not looking at a date.
For the iris, based on local conditions like water and temperature, it is time to flower. It's that simple. The plant is adhering to a completely different, specific, and local temporal logic that has nothing to do with our abstract grid.
The second example, the California buckeye tree, is even more dramatic in its defiance of the clock.
It is. It's so cool. That tree goes dormant in the late summer, a highly unusual schedule compared to nearly every other deciduous tree in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a total anomaly. But these anomalies aren't mistakes in the system. They are unique local clocks that demand our attention and our respect. They show us that time is not uniform.
It's diverse. It's chronodiverse.
And this bioregional perspective is beautifully mirrored in many indigenous cultures. She cites indigenous Australian names for seasons, which are defined not by fixed dates, but by necessary actions or events. A season is literally named the time when the X plant flowers, or the time to collect the Y fruit.
So the time unit itself emphasizes action and relationship and biological process rather than just these fixed, arbitrary lengths of time.
Yes, it's a living calendar.
And this attention to non-human clocks then expands our perception even further, moving us from these annual cycles into the deep time of geology. This is where we encounter the geologist Marcia Bjornerud's concept of timefulness.
Timefulness is a mind-bending idea.
It is timefulness, the impression that the events of the past are still present. That sounds like geological memory, not just influence. Can you give us an example of how Bjornerud argues the past is still present, not just, influencing the present?
Timefulness argues that matter itself holds memory. For a geologist, a rock isn't just a static object that exists now. Its current form and its chemical composition are an ongoing, active process that contains its entire history. The past isn't gone. It's materially embedded and dynamically present within the rock.
Okay, I think I'm following.
Odell illustrates this so powerfully with her observation of beach pebbles. Trying to find the opposite of fungible time, she examines these stones, and she writes that they are two things at once: seafloor from the last ice age and future sand.
Wow, that's a perfect encapsulation of timefulness. The pebble is simultaneously a record of ancient tectonic forces and a prophecy of its own slow, inevitable erosion into sand. It's past and future in one object.
It shows that time is not some monolithic, empty substance washing over us. It is something material, something that starts and stops, bubbles up, collects in the cracks, and folds into mountains. The geological clock runs sideways through matter itself, not just forward in a straight line.
And this profound shift in temporal perception, from seeing the world as static and resources as inert, to seeing them as participants in this deep, material time, that must affect how we define life and agency, right?
It absolutely does. It moves us from viewing the world as dead, or just a pile of inert resources, to recognizing it as fundamentally alive and animate. To see something as inhabiting time with you on its own unique schedule is to start to consider that it has its own experience and that it has its own form of agency.
And that leads to abandoning rigid hierarchy.
It has to. She mentions this one study where indigenous Mexican children were asked if the ground was alive, and they responded yes. Their reasoning was that all elements, animals, plants, the ground itself, are pushing on each other all the time in an active reciprocal process.
I can visualize that. If you really look closely at a tree root penetrating solid rock, focusing on that interface, it becomes incredibly difficult to sustain the strict classification that the tree is alive and the rock is inert. They are both active participants in this big process.
And that leads to her most ecological definition of time. If we had to define it comprehensively, Odell suggests that time is simply the total process, where processes cascade into other processes involving everything and everyone in a constantly shifting network. It's an utterly comprehensive and non-human-centric definition.
So it's not our container, we're in it.
We are just one process among many. And when we understand time as the stuff of life itself, the future ceases to look like an abstract, terrifying horizon. Instead, it returns as a dynamic exchange, a constant, ongoing conversation with an animate world that is always speaking to us. The critical human task, then, is to learn once more how to hear. She even talks about her fear that a beloved place she visits might one day no longer speak to me.
Okay, so we've established that the problem of time scarcity is structural, it's political, it's rooted in these deep historical systems. But the mainstream solution we are always offered is individualistic, the self-help industry. Odell confronts this contradiction head on.
She does. She's highly critical of the commercial self-help world and that productivity bro mindset because it just reinforces the structural lie. The core idea that everyone has 24 fungible hours is patently, obviously false.
Right. It's a foundational myth of that whole industry.
It is. And that premise completely ignores structural barriers and temporal inequities. If you are an able-bodied person with a reliable income and no childcare responsibilities, your 24 hours look radically different than those of a single parent working 2 minimum wage jobs, or a person navigating a complex bureaucracy with a chronic illness.
And the productivity culture, by ignoring that, it makes a systemic failure look like a personal moral failing. You just didn't manage your time well enough.
Exactly. And she specifically grappled with this core moral dilemma. Is there time for self-care in a climate emergency?
That's a heavy question.
It is. And the answer she arrived at, which was prompted by the writer Mina Salami, is that it's an unanswerable question if you see self-care as just stealing little bits of time for the self, totally unrelated to the global catastrophe.
So what's the alternative?
The answer lies in care, not self-help. If we adopt a less individualistic view of the self, if we can recognize that we are a network of human and non-human support, then the phrase self-help becomes obsolete. It just becomes help, or the necessary readjustment and rebuilding of relationships between ourselves, others, and our places.
The practical example she uses of habitat restoration is just brilliant because it completely collapses that false dichotomy between personal well-being and ecological action.
It does. Restoring nesting grounds or cleaning up a local creek is obviously helpful to the non-human world, yes. But it is also profoundly helpful to the people who are doing it. They gain a sense of meaning and connection and temporal belonging that the standardized clock often strips away from their lives. Their care for the birds is simultaneously care for themselves.
This leads us naturally to the structural mandate then. If time is a political good, reclaiming it can't be an individual hack. It has to require collective action.
That's right. Temporal equity means advocating for structural policies that directly give time back to the people who truly have less of it. This means fighting for policies like universal basic income, universal health care, and robust paid childcare and parental leave.
Because those policies don't just redistribute money, they redistribute the one commodity we genuinely lack, which is time.
That's the real currency. And this critique of the standardized clock extends crucially into the experience of marginalized communities. The very idea of the uniformity of standardized chronos is intrinsically linked to ableism and normativity.
How so?
This is why Odell integrates these really important frameworks like queer time and crypt time. These are critical theories that show how marginalized communities necessarily experience and navigate time differently than the mainstream able-bodied heterosexual model.
Can we spend a moment explaining those? Because they feel crucial to her argument about what resistance looks like. How does crypt time, for instance, challenge this normative pace of life?
Crypt time, which was articulated by writers in disability studies, is the recognition that the disabled body often operates at a non-normative pace. Navigating bureaucracy, managing appointments, or simply moving through a world not designed for you often requires slowness, unpredictability, and necessary delays that the chronos system just views as inefficient waste.
So it's a direct challenge to the idea that faster is better.
A direct challenge. Crypt time forces the system to slow down and become accessible. It reframes slowness not as a personal failure or some privileged aesthetic choice, but as a political mandate for survival and for accessibility for all.
And queer time addresses the nonlinearity of identity and life milestones, I'm guessing.
Precisely. Queer time critiques that assumed linear trajectory of life, graduate, get a job, marry, buy a house, have 2.5 children, which is all dictated by the chronological normative clock. Queer lives often require nonlinear identity formation or delayed milestones or repeated self-invention outside of that timeline. So by integrating these ideas, Odell shows that resisting the clock is not just about relaxation or finding a hobby. It's about recognizing that the standardized clock is inherently a vehicle for hierarchy and control, and that real resistance happens when we prioritize human and ecological needs over arbitrary imposed efficiency.
Okay, so if the core problem is commodified time as something you hoard, let's pivot to the positive alternative Odell proposes. She shifts the central metaphor entirely from saving time as hoarding a scarce resource to gardening time as invention and cultivation.
I love that shift so much.
It's beautiful. And this shift was actually informed by her own ironic experience writing this very book. She said she initially applied industrial time to herself, scheduling constant equal output over 2 years, and she just kept missing her own deadlines.
Of course, because writing, like any creative or natural process, happens in stages. It's slower in gestation, maybe faster in drafting. You can't force it.
You can't.
She realized the fallacy of applying chronos to creation. You can't force a uniform rhythm onto something that requires gestation and fallowness and then bursts of activity. It doesn't work.
So gardening time is the solution.
It is. It means inventing and stewarding different non-uniform rhythms of life. It's about celebrating difference, like seasonal festivals or community rituals, rather than viewing non-uniformity as an inconvenience that needs to be managed or optimized away. It is the stewardship of temporal diversity.
And this notion of gardening time fundamentally challenges the zero-sum nature of the clock. If time is money, then giving it away is a net loss for you. But if time is something cultivated, what happens when you give it away?
Well, if time is not money, there's nothing truly to give away because you are simply making a connection. In fact, Odell suggests that when we feel most constrained and scarce, doing something that feels like giving time away, volunteering, having a deep conversation, doing that habitat restoration is often exactly what we need because it reinforces our connection to a larger, non-scarce system.
This brings us to the time as beans metaphor, which just truly grounds this economic shift from scarcity to generosity. It's magnificent because it shows how value can be multiplied, not just divided up.
The story's just wonderful. Odell's friend grew these beans she thought were a lost heirloom variety, but she managed to harvest a few and shared them with others.
Okay.
And those friends didn't just eat them. They let the pods mature, they saved the seeds, they planted them, and eventually they gave an even greater yield back to her, propagating the entire line of beans cumulatively.
So the beans multiplied.
They multiplied. So the joke, time is beans, means that you can take time, you can give time, and most importantly, you can plant time to grow more of it for everyone. Your time, Odell suggests, grew out of someone else's time, and the best way to get more time in the future is often to invest it in others through mutual care and generosity.
This directly refutes the zero-sum game of modern industrial life. I'm thinking of the philosopher Ivan Illich, who critiqued what he called monolithic delivery systems, where every gain for one person or group is necessarily a loss or a burden for another. A classic zero-sum calculation.
The beans are the perfect antithesis of that. They show that value can be created mutually. It is a cumulative, non-zero-sum game. You don't have to steal time from your neighbor or from the ecosystem to gain time for yourself. You can plant time, and both you and the community benefit from the resulting harvest.
I think this linguistic shift is what makes Odell's work so powerful. She even plans to reframe her next project's work log entirely based on this concept of generosity and connection.
Yes, instead of writing a log of what she did, she plans to frame her work in terms of things that were given to me.
That's a huge shift.
It is. She wants to record things like, my friend gave me a really important book, or this bird landed in a tree near me and it made me think about this, or the earth offered me this insight when I was standing still.
That reframing is radical. It's recognizing her creative output, and really all meaningful work, as the sum of many, many gifts given by many people and places. It completely shifts the focus away from the myth of the lone, efficient industrial producer.
It demands that we acknowledge the web of support that makes any act of creation possible.
So we've traveled a great distance in this deep dive. We moved from the pain of Chronos, the commodified linear clock built for industrial control and profit, to the radical potential of Kairos, the qualitative opportune moment that opens up career possibility and agency.
It's quite a journey.
It is. And the journey has shown us that the solution to time anxiety is not to speed up or become more efficient, but to look closely at local chronodiversity, the rhythms of nature, of geology, and of community, which provides a model for thinking about difference without boundaries. The true meaning of saving time, as Odell defines it, is to rescue it from these rigid definitions, from commodification and from misuse. It's recognizing its fundamentally irreducible and inventive nature. If we can save time by seeing it for what it truly is, perhaps time might, in turn, save us.
And this path, it requires a kind of courageous rest. Odell notes that we are so conditioned to constant activity, so used to the busy calendar, that a moment of true, non-productive rest might actually unleash what the great Toni Morrison called the seep of
The
rage.
seep of rage.
Yeah, we've internalized the hustle so completely that when we finally stop, the uncomfortable truth of our constrained lives, the feeling of what we've lost or what had been taken from us, that might just flood in. And the ultimate challenge is learning to sit with that truth and channeling it into collective action rather than more personal anxiety.
Which makes the redirection of our attention the ultimate act of resistance. We are constantly told that our attention is our most valuable asset, yet we just willingly give it away to digital systems designed to commodify it. So reclaiming that agency, transforming your attention from a passive resource into an active, deliberate decision to observe, or to connect, or to rest, that becomes an act of refusal to participate in the very system that stole your time.
So we want to leave you with this provocation for further reflection. If you were to start your own work log, but framed it only by the gifts, the connections, and the non-human observations that enabled your progress, the books given to you, the conversations that spurred an insight, the birds that made you pause, whose time would you be acknowledging? And how would that fundamentally change your concept of productivity and worth? Think about that network of beings.